in the mid 1990s, Snake River sockeye salmon were the first salmon in the Columbia River Basin that was listed under the Endangered Species Act, and they were listed as endangered. Shortly thereafter, Snake River spring summer Chinook and Snake River steelhead were listed. So all of these, the major declines that really brought attention and ESA listing happened in the mid 1990s. Really starting in about 2015, we started seeing some incredibly low steelhead abundances. And, salmon population cycle, it's just part of the natural system. Any animal lives in nature is going to go through cycles. But what we started seeing in 2015 was we started seeing some really significant declines in steelhead abundance. And this was both on the hatchery and the wild side.
Hi, I'm Nate PK. I'm a beginning documentary filmmaker, and this is my first documentary that you're watching. So, a little bit about me. My background is I spent 20 years in the military, so a lot of time overseas, 4 deployments in those 20 years overseas, away from family. And I realized that my life was really out of balance. All of my stories were about work, the military, and so I had a hard time relating to people that wasn't working all the time or related to the military. So essentially I paid no attention to the outdoors during my previous life. So if you would have asked me what my opinion was to spend money, taxpayer money, on hatcheries or monies to restore fish habitat, I would have voted no every time. So to help connect me and others like me that have really let their lives go out of balance with just all work, I started a Facebook group for people to fish together. And I made some new friends, and many share a passion for steelhead, a passion I don't really understand, because I have never caught a steelhead. So if the steelhead went extinct today or tomorrow, I wouldn't be affected. I have no emotional connection to steelhead. But steelhead has recently, and specifically this documentary, has started taking a lot of my time and a lot of my thoughts. So this is my steelhead story. Having just bought a camera this year for my documentary, I knew it would be a challenge to tell a story about fish to people who aren't interested in fish or fishing. So I figured the first thing I should do is to meet anglers and find out why their passion exists for these steelhead. First and foremost, why are steelhead special? And then meet experts on possible steelhead mortality factors. And then finally interview experts on what is the best steelhead survival plan.
Every time that we're out on the water is great memories. Just whether spending time with family, friends, seeing the wildlife and just being out in nature. But with steelhead, we've had some incredibly epic years of just getting to, hook into that fish that you can talk about for years. Literally. That it's just the memories. It's time spent refreshing the soul and connecting with nature, connecting with family, connecting with friends.
All right, my name is Kyle McCurdy. I'm the shop manager here at Waterworks West Fly Fishing Outfitters in Port Angeles, Washington. It's a cliche, but steelhead are just an incredibly magical fish. They're a bit of a mystery. They're born as a rainbow trout in the rivers, and then in the early stages of their life, they leave the rivers and spend a year to 4 or 5 years in the salt water, just feeding and growing. No one really knows exactly where they go or what they do. But then when it's time for them to spawn, they travel thousands of miles and come back into the river they were born in. And they're incredibly resilient and tough and a strong fish, and like catching one of them, whether it's on conventional gear or a fly rod, is just an absolute thrill. The second you hook that fish, your heart rate just skyrockets, and they just cartwheel out of the water and just make the most amazing run for their life, and it's an absolutely addicting feeling.
It does. Spunky old guy. Yeah. Nice job.
So I was out there swinging a green-butted skunk through in the evening. You know, it's beautiful weather. Not thinking about anything, hadn't caught any fish yet. Came through this little pool area below the grass clumps there, and it goes dink. I'm going, oh, little trout. So I flicked it out there again, and dink. You know, I'm going, well, I'm gonna set on him this time. If he bites again, then you know, it was a steelhead. It just come up, you know, and I go, oh,
here we go.
that's not a trout. And it just sat there for a second, you know, and it's almost dark out, and the moon's coming up over the hillside, and all of a sudden he realized he was hooked, and he just took off and went across the river like lightning. I had this white fly line, I'll never forget it, and it looked like a laser going across the river. Just, and he got clear to the other side and beached himself on the other side. Came clear out of the water, was flopping around on the beach on the other, still hooked up. And finally I had some pressure on him, and he bounced back into the water, went tearing downstream. I floundered and fell in and waded down, you know, like 50 yards, finally landed him in the moonlight. And so that was my first steelhead ever. So that was a nice introduction. Of course, I had to put ice on.
Wrestling fish in the water, that's it.
You know, I had to put ice on my shins, and from getting beat up, falling in, chasing it downstream in the dark, and
I love it.
unbelievable.
Yeah. It's like,
Mike, what would it be like if there was no steelhead?
Oh, it would, you know, it would not be the same, I don't think, for many, many people. You know, the people that have caught steelhead, and even the ones that only wish to catch steelhead, but maybe haven't yet done it. You know, I would not, you know, the world would be a little shallower place, I think. You know, they just have a aura about them that is special. And I think that's partly because what they go through to end up back where they are. You know, the whole streamborne ocean travel and return is pretty amazing, you know, story all by itself. So.
And to survive it multiple times,
Yeah.
as opposed to salmon coming up once and dying.
Absolutely.
The memories that I've got from that is so good, because 1994 my boy lost his leg up above the knee due to cancer, and there's a lot of places that we had to go through back sloughs and whatnot, and he couldn't walk in his crutches, and so either me or one of my buddies throw him on our backs and pack him across on the river bar. We go at it again. He caught a high teener and whatnot, and one just hammered mine. And I grabbed it and I thought, Bud, that's a dandy. That's a monster. And I went to fighting it and whatnot, and the water's a little murky, and I felt him run between my legs, and I picked my leg up and I fell over backwards in the river. Was splashing around, still trying to keep a hold of the fish and so on and so forth, and I got him up to the bank, and Mike slipped the net under him, and he goes, Dad, you fell in the river for that one? He said, look at mine. And whatnot. It was just, I mean, I'll never forget it. And you can ask Bob or Mike or anybody around here. We love fishing as much as anybody, but the kids were the highlights to take.
I interviewed over 20 anglers, and all of them were thrilled to share their steelhead stories with me. Coming from a trout background in Big Sky, Montana, I'm used to catching pretty small fish or pretty small trout. And to see these large rainbow trout that are ocean going and come back from the ocean. It's just an amazing sight to see. An immediate thing that I was struck was that, differently from my trout fishing, a lot of the times the anglers have to chase the fish, as the fish are so powerful that they overwhelm the rod and reel tackle sets. If I had to summarize on the 20 anglers, it's a combination of thrilling fight and, for a lot of them, a deep appreciation and gratitude for the species. Now it's time to meet fish managers and find out why these fish are in trouble.
Washington State as a whole, in most places, are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. Coastal steelhead are unique in that they have not been listed under the Endangered Species Act. So that's a pretty important difference other places. So the status of coastal steelhead, while not listed, we know that they are declining in abundance. So we're watching them really close, and we're taking pretty bold action here to make sure that we're in this transition zone where we're actually increasing abundance. When we look at numbers from past wild steelhead abundance, we can see that total wild steelhead abundance across the coastal region exceeded 60,000 fish in many years. So in this graph, each color represents a different river system that coastal steelhead are returning to. And when we stack them on top of each other, we can see the total number of wild steelhead for each system. Today, in all of these rivers, the number of wild steelhead are much less than they used to be. And in most cases, less than half the number of wild steelhead are showing up to each river. In fish management, people often refer to the 4 H's. So we're thinking about hydropower, hatcheries, harvest, and habitat. These are really important for most fish on the West Coast here, but specifically salmon and steelhead. In the coastal region, this is no different. All 4 of these principles are really important to consider when managing any fish population. But specifically when we have a population that has declining abundance, all 4 of these principles are extremely important. And an example of that is if we have some aspect of these 4 H's that's not performing well, so possibly we have habitat issues. If we improve the habitat, even in a significant way, but we don't pay attention to things like hatcheries or hydropower or harvest, we may not see the full benefit of that improvement. So for us at Fish and Wildlife, a real comprehensive look at all 4 of those is the way we're going to move forward with.
My name is Jared Higginbotham. I work for Yakima Bait Company. I am the Assistant Sales and Marketing Manager. So Yakima Bait, we have 2 factories. We have one here in Granger, Washington, and there's roughly 45 to 50 employees. And fishing is what puts food on the table for all of us, all of us employees. Every lure I go out and sell benefits every employee here. And, you know, fishing is something that has to be available. You have to have these fish for us to be able to sell fishing lures in certain locations. And so with no fish, that economy dies. That customer that buys that lure for that specific area is gone. So, you know, it's so important for the livelihood of so many. You know, I mean, when I go out and I go to work, I'm not just out selling fishing lures so people can catch fish. Yes, that's part of the coolest part of my job, but I sell fishing lures because I love every one of these employees. I love every one of their family members. I know them all. And, you know, in a way, they rely on myself and the President Dan McDonald to get out and sell this gear so they can build it so we can all have a job. So, you know, the fact that the fish are here and stay here and we take care of fish and fisheries and habitat for these fish is very, very vital to our way of life.
So my name's Dan McDonald. I'm the president of Yakima Bait Company. I've been president since January of 2013, and this is a family business. We've also introduced a number of fishing lures in the steelhead market, and over the last 40 years, that part of our business has continued to have battles. There's been obviously a decline in returning steelhead. This has affected us in a number of ways. Oftentimes, summertime, depending on steelhead returns, we've had to do a reduction in hours for our production. We've often had to go from a 40-hour work week to a 32-hour work week, and those things are unfortunate. And we've had to diversify products just because of that. The opportunities that are available for us with our product and brands within the steelhead industry is huge. We're known for these products, and to see the declines continue to take place, it's been a real economic issue for us. Looking to the future, there is opportunity. These steelhead runs can be returned. The science is backing supports us for these measures, and for our community, it's a tremendous amount of not only local jobs, but all the jobs within our industry for steelhead fishing.
Steelhead fishing, especially in the Yakima Valley, has been something that brought not only people together and fun and dinner on the table for families, but it brought an economic impact to the Yakima Valley that is something that if it goes away, it can't be replaced. That piece of that pie is gone forever. You don't get to replace it. And I managed a store called Hammers Outdoor World. It was in Union Gap, which is a suburb of Yakima, Washington. And I managed that store for 8 years. And the first 6 years I was there, steelhead fishing was good. It was open at night. We had, a lot of local fisheries, and they went from basically May all the way until November, December, January. You could fish steelhead everywhere, right? And that economic impact, that economic value of that was every day I was selling line, I was selling leader, I was selling bait, I was selling ice, I was selling hooks, I was selling weights, lures, licenses for the state, everything out of that store. And all of a sudden, steelhead runs start to diminish. They start to dwindle to the point that these fisheries that we used to be able to participate in, there was a lot of them in different places that were gone. Like, no more fishing, can't fish for steelhead. And when that happened, that daily cash flow, that daily money coming in, it really put the store in a bind, because that fishery was so demanding, especially for Yakima Valley people, that it basically is one of the things that put the store under by losing that particular fishery. So, steelhead are important, not just to put on your table, not just to go out and high five with your buddies. That stuff's all great. But they're important for economic impact for people working for jobs. The overall impact of bringing back salmon and steelhead fisheries just in this valley alone is astronomical. Your friend's job down the road can be my job, right? Like, I have a great job. You can be involved in fishing. It's going to bring back, these hotels, these restaurants, all these things that are gone, that you're missing, that you don't get to see anymore. This is what this brings back. We have, I think that there would be more jobs coming to this reason, but not necessarily like new businesses either, right? But Buffalo Wild Wings will be busier. Motel 6 will be busier. Hertz Rental Car will be busier. Yakima Airport will be busier. Uber will be busier. Yeah. All these things that benefit so many people, that's the game changer, right? That's the game changer. It's building these businesses. It's not like we have to start new. It's growing the ones we already have that we already support.
From our most recent Lower Snake River Dam Benefit Replacement Draft Report that Governor Inslee and Senator Murray have put together, they have identified, and specifically to this area, that's been estimated that restored salmon fisheries in the Columbia Basin could generate up to $1 billion annually in additional regional personal income, benefits, and support up to 25,000 new family wage jobs.
We have awesome wineries here. People are already coming here, right? Let's give them something else, right? Let's make Yakima Valley, the Eastern Washington, the Alaska, right? To where people travel here for a destination, not only for the wineries or you know, to see the farming or whatever, to fish, right? To come here to fish, you know? And not only that, it brings families together. Fishing brings families together, right? And so there's so many positive impacts that it so outweighs the negative impact that it's just a given.
As a company and as a manufacturer, these are real opportunities. These are real jobs. You've seen the real people at this factory today. These are real things that we could increase. These are the economics that nobody's talking about. When I tell my in-laws who enjoy low power, they don't realize that 4 Snake River dams provide 5% or less of the actual power on the hydro grid. That what is being told to them is misrepresenting the numbers. And so when we look at these reports and we see that $1 billion annually, that is a huge amount. If that includes all the other costs that are diminished by removing dams, it's even more significant. And I think those are the facts that I wish more people had the opportunity to hear and understand. It's not coming from, you know, a manufacturer that's solely dependent. We've had to diversify. But just imagine if we had those fish back, our business would be thriving. The guide business, the tourism business, all these local economic jobs. But if we were to return those runs even 10 years ago, it would be an economic boost that would be unbelievable for just not only us, but everybody associated with the steelhead in this industry. Everybody has to think through is listen to what their vote will mean, whether it's in the primaries, whether it's in November. What does that vote mean? Does that vote mean I'm going to continue with the status quo, or am I about change, and change for what is best for the economy of where I live, that's real, and not being told to me by lobbyists and politicians that are trying to keep their jobs?
So thinking about this issue of steelhead and what problems they're experiencing here, they were first listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act in 2007. That listing was revised or renewed in 2014. They're still listed as threatened. But we were seeing problems here in Hood Canal, which is the water body behind me, as early as the late 1990s. So around 1999, NoAA and Long Live the Kings, the Skokomish Indian tribe, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and others decided to try a novel technique to restore steelhead populations, because we were in a situation where in a river like the Hamahama River that may have had up to 1,000 steelhead returning or more, we were down to 18 adult steelhead returning to the river, which was a crisis. And this was before they were listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act. We didn't know why that was. The habitat on at least the west side of Hood Canal is really quite good. A lot of it's in the national forest and big national park. Fishing has been curtailed for steelhead here. And there's no production hatchery program for steelhead in existence now either. So the impacts were significantly lower here, and we couldn't understand why they were down. So a strategy to recover them was to employ a novel hatchery recovery program where we would sample adult steelhead in the environment, look where they're spawning, mark their reds, come back after time had expired, and collect their fertilized eggs. So we knew that the offspring of these fish are fish that could fertilize eggs in nature. Take them back to a hatchery, rear them for a period of time, low growth rates and low densities, release most of those fish back into the environment as 2-year-old smolts ready to head to sea, retain a small portion of the fish for adults to adulthood, and release them back into their native rivers when they're ready to spawn. So this was thought of as an approach that would increase the population against whatever the insults were that were causing the population to decline and essentially keep it from going extinct. And what we found is that we were able to get the population numbers up by about a factor of 10, but we were looking for a factor of 100 at least, and we weren't very close to what we considered recovery targets. And we started looking at, given that the habitat in the canal is pretty good, in both the marine environment and the watersheds, we started looking for other factors. And one of the things that we did was to put acoustic transmitters in steelhead smolts that were going into the marine environment and then track them using receivers throughout Hood Canal and out into the Strait of Juan de Fuca. What we found there is that there seemed to be a significant amount of dropout active transmitters around the Hood Canal Bridge. In other words, steelhead mortality seemed higher in the general vicinity of the Hood Canal Bridge, which is the infrastructure you see behind me here. It floats on Hood Canal across 83% of the channel. There are open spans on either end, and it goes down 15 feet into the water. So this was interesting to us. In general, though, we were losing about 85% of the steelhead in their first 2 weeks of marine migration. If you look at mortality throughout the entire extent of Hood Canal and out to the middle of the Strait of Juan de Fuca, that was a pretty high mortality rate. So there was a significant amount of dropout of acoustic transmitters in steelhead around the bridge here, but there was also significant loss before and after the bridge. So what we did is thinking that, well, what is going on at the bridge? Got some funding from the state, the Washington State Legislature, and Senator Kristen Wolfus from Kitsap County provided funding for us to do an intensive study for 2 years at the bridge to look at what might be impacting steelhead survival, and if it was in fact right at the bridge where it was occurring. So we were looking at the distribution of steelhead vertically in the water column, horizontally across the face of the bridge, extending out from the bridge in 2 directions. We also had temperature sensitive transmitters that would read if the temperature of the probe went up, indicating perhaps predation by a warm-blooded animal. And we did that for 2 years in a row. We also looked at things like noise at the bridge and lights. Were those causing problems for steelhead? And what we found 2 years in a row is that around 50% of the steelhead perished at the bridge. And in almost every case, when a transmitter eventually stopped transmitting, the swimming behavior associated with that transmitter would change. It would go from being right at the surface like a juvenile steelhead to moving up and down in the water column. In many cases, the temperature went way up, indicating predation by a warm-blooded predator. So it appears that predation is a significant source of mortality for steelhead here in Hood Canal, and we think in other places in Puget Sound. We think that it is a warm-blooded predator like a harbor seal and or a harbor porpoise, or harbor porpoises and harbor seals that are causing the mortality, and that there is something to do with the structure of the bridge floating down into the water for an active surface migrator like steelhead that is causing them to get caught at the bridge and held up and then collecting there, more susceptible to predation. And in fact, visual observations have indicated that harbor seals corral juvenile steelhead into the corners of the bridge and have increased predation there. Putting the kind of mortality that we're seeing at the Hood Canal Bridge for steelhead in context, at 50%, that is a number that's equivalent to mortality on juvenile steelhead leaving the Snake River Basin that is caused by 4 lower Snake River dams as the fish go out and their reservoirs, and 4 lower Columbia River dams and their reservoirs. So the cumulative impact of 8 dams is the same as the impact of the Hood Canal Bridge, and that's really significant. So we have a challenge here, and we need to do something about it. In order to address the challenge that we see for steelhead at the bridge. We received more funding from the Washington State Legislature, and right now we're devising devices that we can put in the corners of the bridge to allow steelhead to pass more quickly past the bridge, hopefully going under the open spans on the end and not being caught there swimming back and forth in the bridge and being subject to predation. If we can increase the survival there by even 10%, that would be a significant impact. If not, if that doesn't work, then maybe the only solution here is to replace this bridge with a design that allows fish to pass unobstructed underneath the bridge. That's a very expensive proposition, so we're hoping that in the meantime, while we come up with a design and wait for other transportation projects to get taken care of, that these devices or structures that we put on the bridge will increase survival significantly. So some of the impacts that we worry about for steelhead are things like high temperature in our rivers, pollution in our rivers. We have steelhead in the Nisqually River that have high concentrations of flame retardants. We are concerned about lack of habitat, and wild steelhead will rear in freshwater for 2 years before going to sea. So for the entire year, the river has to be in the kind of condition that can support steelhead. We have to have cool running water. We have to have places for those fish to hide. We have to have insects and food for them to eat. And so we really need to start thinking about how we take care of our riparian areas.
I'm a girl. My English name is Kian Singer, and I'm 18 years old. I'm the cultural ambassador of the Confederate Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation Youth Council, and I'm so happy to see you all here. I first want to thank you guys for coming, because I recently was just at my university orientation, and I was so overwhelmed with how many people I did not know. And when I came here and I seen you guys supporting us as Native American people fighting climate change, it hurt, because I've never been around so many people who cared about us. It's always so hard to go near people who don't know who I am or what I represent. Everyone's here today coming together because we care about our water, our salmon, and our people. Everyone, we are all a community standing up together to fight what we believe in. It was so powerful just to see the bald eagle that was coming to us, because it's Creator telling us that He believes in us, that we're going forward together. That bald eagle is a symbol to us as Native American people. We're going down. Just like Najoni said, the salmon are dying. That's us. We are salmon people. That's who we are. Without the salmon, what are we? People? We're just gonna stand around doing nothing? No, as youth and CTYR, we're standing with other tribe and tribal leaders, and of course you guys, to come forward to our president and all these Oregon legislators, because we want change and we need it now. Just as my grandma said in 1950s, that's a long time ago, and I'm a 4th generation fisherwoman. My great grandma told her kids, I'm gonna fight for our fish in the treaty wars, in the treaty of fishing rights. They got their land and they got their treaty fishing spots, but they wanted to fish. They wanted to tell my mom, I'm gonna fight for you because I want your daughters and your sons to fish out there on the Columbia River. I'm gonna promise you, daughter, that I'm gonna bring fish home to you. Well, look what happened. She did it. She got her treaty rights. She got the fishing spots on the Columbia River, but now what? The fish are dying. That was supposed to be something I was supposed to do when I was growing up, was fish on the river, but now I can't because the fish are dying. And it hurts so much knowing that my grandma, my great grandma, who passed away recently, is no longer able to see the fish anymore. And she knew that the fish were going to be gone. And it's so hard knowing that even the fish these size are no longer here. I mean, the most fish I've ever seen in my life in one tote was 12. Like, my grandma used to fish all the time. And it's so hard knowing that we're not going to see those numbers anymore. The native fish are dying, and we're relying on these genetically engineered fish that look weird. I don't know. I don't want to touch those, but I know that our native species need to stay here in the rivers, and that the water matters to us because it's who we are as tribal people. And I really related to Taya over there because it hurts knowing that our tribal people are dying and that fish is who we are. And this is probably the first time I've ever shed tears or showed any emotions, because it's what my mom's been asking me all day. Is what is wrong with you, Kian? Why aren't you showing any emotions? Because it hurts. I've I've never cried in front of people because I just thought I've got to be strong for my grandma and all the people who rely on me to bring the fish back home. And I want to thank you guys so much for coming. It's so meaningful knowing that you guys care about us.
I really feel that way. I mean, there's such a small group of people that really steelhead fish and care about it compared to the overall, the general population. It's just like people in New York freak out about the whales. When the whales are in jeopardy because they don't have the food or whatever, the New York Times can put an article about the whales. And not everybody, but a lot of people go, oh my God, the whales are, blah, 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 and they get some traction. The New York Times can write an article about steelhead and not near as many people will go, oh my God, the steelhead out in the West Coast are hurting. It's just a fact of life. Most people don't feel like I do.
Can you describe, for the people that don't know anything about steelhead, why that fish is so special when you hold it?
It's special because it starts that big and some little crook, maybe only that wide, and it goes all the way downstream to the ocean. It's 500 miles to the ocean right down here on the corner. And then it goes, who knows where, Japan or wherever in the ocean, with all the different things that want to eat it. When it gets in the ocean, it's got all the ocean predators, plus the commercial fishing, plus contaminated water with nuclear energy, plus everything else. And it comes all the way back and goes right back to that same little natal trickle. That's what, to me, makes them special.
My name's Lance Hebden, and I'm the Bureau Chief of Fisheries with the Idaho Department of Fish and Game. There's kind of two stories in steelhead. Prior to the 1970s, all of our steelhead were wild. When you hit the 1970s and through the 90s, you start getting programs coming online, hatchery programs. The hatchery programs were put in place to offset losses of wild steelhead as a result of construction of dams. So in Idaho, we have basically three big steelhead hatchery programs. One of them is to offset the losses from the construction and operation of Dvorak Dam on the North Fork of the Clearwater. We have the Hells Canyon Complex, which is run by Idaho Power. So there are Idaho Power funded steelhead mitigation programs as a result of the construction and operation of Hells Canyon. And then the last is the Lower Snake River Compensation Plan hatcheries, which were funded and established to offset the losses from the construction of dams on the Lower Snake River. Once those hatchery programs were started, what you see those hatchery programs coming online really in the late 90s. It took a while to get those programs kind of settled down, and once the facilities were constructed and being operated. And then really through the early 2000s, mid 2000s, we had some really good hatchery returns that supported some pretty tremendous steelhead fisheries in Idaho, both state and tribal.
You? Well, it's important to me because my family has fished. My grandpa was born in 1906, 32 years before Bonneville Dam went in. My aunts were born in the 1930s. We fished, they fished, and I fished with them in the 70s. We quit fishing as a family for a bit, and now I've started fishing again with them. Well, I guess in the 90s. 30, 40 years seems like a fast time to me, but anyhow, we fish and that's what we do. We eat them, we sell them, we provide them to the rest of the tribe or tribal members. So I've always been in fish.
So it's important to me because salmon, steelhead, they're iconic to the Pacific Northwest, right? In the Columbia River, the Snake Basin. This is the heart of where these fish have been produced for thousands of years. And just only in the last 100, the returns have declined to the point where we're worried about losing them. And salmon are cool. There's huge important part of the ecosystem. They provide for people, they provide for animals. For us to lose that is almost unthinkable. So to me, I can't imagine doing anything else other than working to try and restore and recover these fish.
When the tribe signed the treaty in 1855, there were still good numbers of natural fish here, and the millions. The tribe ate 60% of their diet was salmon and steelhead. So there were 10,000 of us. 60% of your food every day would have resulted in several 100,000 fish we consumed a year. But the Lewiston Dam went in, and other canneries and stuff happened on the lower Columbia. So the numbers went down and wild fish numbers went down. This dam was built in the late 60s, and there were still some steelhead that made it here. So the mitigation goal was 20,000 fish returning here, which is greatly reduced from the historic numbers. And now if you take what's happened to wild fish and hatchery fish since this dam's in the hatchery's construction, you can see the trend's gone up and down in the 20 to 30,000 fish range. So,
like Mike said, when the 4 lower snake dams were constructed, there was probably around 100,000 steelhead that were still coming back to the Snake River, given that there was all those historical impacts. And that declined further in the 1990s, and the fish became listed under the Endangered Species Act. And that prompted a lot of actions to be put in place through the Northwest Power Act and the Bonneville Powers Fish and Wildlife Program. There's been a lot of habitat work that's been done. Through litigation on the hydro system, there's been actions put in place to help fish get past dams, both as juveniles on their way out and adults returning. Ocean conditions have fluctuated up and down. In the last 5 years, there's been a drastic reduction in steelhead returns back to the Columbia and the Snake Basin. And we're very concerned. After you get 5 or 6 years more in a drastic decline, it's really hard to pull the abundance back up. And so we're doing what we can for wild fish, but we're also producing hatchery fish to be able to provide fish for harvest to mitigate for the effects of those dams. Without hatchery production, there would not be any fish up here to utilize, either in sport fisheries or any meaningful tribal harvest. So for total returns in 2016, it was over 100,000 steelhead. But last year, total returns, including the hatchery returns, was less than 50,000, and the wild fish were less than 10,000. We've seen a drastic decline. It's further concerning because of the climate change situation that we are dealing with and the warming ocean conditions. We can't continue to do the same old and expect a different outcome. But in the meantime, we also have to have the hatchery production to be able to have fish to utilize to support economies, to support tribal culture, and to provide an opportunity to access steelhead. The people don't fish on wild fish. It's the hatchery fish that provide any opportunity for food. In the last 5 years, there have been fishing closures, which in Idaho is like a big deal.
Yeah, Idaho, the state sportsmen changed their season to 1 over 28 inches, which would be a B steelhead, to where typically they were fishing for 3 or 4 a day to 1 a day. In fact, I don't think they even kept anything over 28 last year.
Yes, so that's a huge deal for in the state of Idaho. Like we said before, you can fish for steelhead 10 months out of the year typically.
Yeah, with the low number of returning hatchery fish last year to the basin, at Lower Granite Dam, there's a trap, and it will trap a certain percentage of the returning adults over the dam. So last year, we went down and transported adults from the trap to the hatchery to avoid them having to swim through fisheries to get to the hatchery for the next year's production.
I told you this hatchery is supposed to return about 20,000 adults, and it only takes less than 2,000 to provide the brood stock to produce the 2 million juveniles, that we produce here. And we were concerned. It looked like we weren't going to be able to even get our brood stock needs. And we went down to Lower Granite Dam, which is about a 2-hour drive from here, to be able to pull fish out that were climbing the fish ladder and transported them back here for brood stock. That was a really drastic measure. We haven't ever had to do that in the history of this program.
So as the river warms with global warming or climate change, however you want to think of it, Rorschach Dam is a deep reservoir. Any deep reservoir, 5 degrees on the bottom. So we release water out of the dam to cool the river below. So as the snake comes from South Idaho, it's warm. At confluence at Lewiston, it's 70 degrees or more, so we send cold water from the dam here down to cool the river. And what that does is it provides a cold water refuge for some of those upper migrating fish in the snake and salmon to hold up in the lower Clearwater, but it also allows fish to continue migrating up the snake from its confluence with the Columbia because the water temperature comes down. And it allows the trap at Granite to operate because over 70 degrees, if you hold a salmonid fish and handle it, it'll probably die.
So what the situation is with the 4 lower snake dams is that they basically create 4 lakes, and they make 4 lakes out of the Snake River. They slow water down and it's able to heat up, and it's too warm for salmon to survive in during the summer. And so the dam that you see behind us is actually operated as a cooling system. The water, like Mike said, that's coming out of there is very cold. Operates that during the summer in coordination with the tribe on how things go to move cooling flows through the system so that the fish are able to survive and actually migrate up the river. As the climate changes further and things get warmer, that's going to be harder and harder to do. As it is right now, we're basically running out of cool water before the water cools itself, like in October. We're running out of cool water to cool things down. It's going to be imperative that the dams are removed to be able to provide a habitat for our fish to continue to survive, especially the wild fish. There's no chance that we'll have of recovering them without that.
With the removal of those 4 dams, that cold water releases would reach farther down into the Columbia system and aid and speed the migration of those fish through the system. Not just the out migrating fish, but the up migrating adults that come through the system.
Okay. So hatcheries, not the factor that is preventing our wild returns from recovering. Hatcheries are standing in the gap, basically, and providing an opportunity for people to still be connected with salmon and steelhead, still have an opportunity to harvest fish and use them for cultural and spiritual reasons. Hatcheries are a tool to hang on to wild fish while we try to deal with the things that are causing their decline. Fighting really hard to hang on to our wild fish, and I would just reemphasize with you that we're not going to be able to do that without removing those 4 lower snake dams. In order for us to effectively use that hatchery tool the way we can, the best way we can for hatchery fish and wild fish, we really need to take care of our infrastructure. These facilities, all the facilities in the Columbia Basin are aging. A lot of them are 50 years old, like this one right here, and the piping and the electricity, the electrical and the concrete are failing and crumbling. We really need an investment into those facilities. The dams that they're mitigating for are being taken care of with capital infrastructure, but the hatchery facilities that are mitigating for the impacts of those dams are not.
The salmon and steelhead are important to the tribe, and without them, we don't exist as we used to exist or how we want to exist. And that we need these hatcheries to continue our way of life until we can recover natural populations. Right now we're fishing at hatcheries, and we would rather fish out in the wild in the places where we historically fished. But given what we have to have these hatcheries to fish every year.
Guys that travel halfway across the world to come and spend 4 or 5 days here, and it's special to talk to those guys. We talk about what happens in their world, we talk about what happens in my world, but these fish bring us together. And to have someone come from a long way away and hook a fish, only one fish, or not even hook a fish in their trip, they don't go away them going, I'm never coming back. They're going away going, I'm coming back to get what it is, because they are that special. It impacts everybody, because I mean, if these fish were to disappear in my tenure here, where am I going to go? Because there's not many places left, and that's one of the things that's really special about here right now is we have a few fish. I mean, look at the Puget Sound. Those rivers have been void for a long time, and it's really sad because some of those rivers had tremendous runs of fish. You know, I mean, 2 years ago, driving over in between down to Auburn, the back road right there, it goes across the Cedar. And I just look at the Cedar and go, man, you know, that used to have tremendous run of steelhead in it. They're gone. They're special, but as far as this town, I would have to move somewhere else. Then I take my business out, and my guys don't come to the hotels, which, you know, it's not a major impact. It's not like I'm bringing thousands of people here, but every dollar that comes to your community counts.
So when we talk about the steelhead issue in our area and the four Snake River dams, I won't argue with anybody that the Snake River Dam removal might not help the steelhead recovery. I do not believe it will recover the steelhead. I believe you have to address commercial fishing off the ocean, and you got to extend our boundaries outwards to stop the unauthorized commercial fishing. And you also have to address the habitat. And the habitat, I don't mean habitat that's within the bounds of where the steelhead can go now. Dorshak Dam needs passage or removed. Hell's Gate Dam needs passage or removed, as well as all the other dams in southern Idaho. If you open up the habitat to more steelhead spawning, you're going to increase the number of steelhead and salmon that come back. And so the proposal to remove the 4 dams, I feel, is way too quick. They should do other things before they remove the 4 dams. I do not believe the studies that I read that say there won't be any effect by removing the 4 dams, but I do not believe the studies that say there will be total recovery. There will never be total recovery without opening up the habitat that the steelhead and salmon used to have to spawn in. So Dorshak Dam, I believe, was put in under the assumption of providing hydroelectric power and also flood control. It removed the North Fork totally from the spawning area, which was a major spawning area for Clearwater B-type steelhead. They put a hatchery in, which does not replace the natural spawning. Hell's Gate Canyon, I do not know the real reason it was put in. It produces electricity. I do not know how much irrigation comes out of Hell's Gate. The other dams up the Snake River are mainly for irrigation and electric production. So removing Dorshak and Hell's Canyon and all the other dams up the Snake River would have a severe impact on southern Idaho irrigation, on the agriculture, on everything to do in southern Idaho. It'd take away turning southern Idaho green. It'd allow the water to flow down the snake and keep the snake cool. So there would be severe economical impact by removing those dams. I feel that they should have fish passage as a first priority to let the fish go where they used to go and reestablish the runs and then see what our numbers are. So if they do remove the 4 Snake River dams, the big issue to farmers is the barging and the expense of getting our grain down to the Columbia. They say they'll put in rail systems. They say they'll put in better highways. That's fine for them to say. 10 years from now, they'll all forget about all their promises. Rail prices will be 3 times what they are right now, and it'll be very economical impact on farmers in this area. So if the dams were removed, before they remove them, they have to have a rail system that will provide transportation for all the grain up and down the river, and it has to be at an affordable level. The trucking, the roads that are presently in our area will not take moving the grain by trucking. The roads will need improved to increase the trucking activity on the roads and not turn them into a total hazard for people driving in eastern Washington. Those 2 things will definitely have to be addressed before they remove the dams and implemented before they remove the dams. There has to be some supplement to the farmers to pay them for the decrease in the price of grain they're going to get, the net price of grain they'll get because of the increase in shipping. So in my opinion, before you spend a lot of money with the Simpson plan or any other plan that talks about removing the 4 Snake River dams, I believe that we should address fish passage on the North Fork and on the Snake River all the way to Montana, and increased hatchery and reestablishing those fish in those streams. And commercial fishermen should be compensated for the salmon and steelhead they would catch, and it should be stopped. I do not understand how you can catch endangered fish and make a living off of it.
I went to high school in Richland, Washington, so I still consider Richland, Washington, the Tri-Cities area, my home, and I still have family there. And that Tri-Cities area has benefited greatly from Columbia River dams. The tremendous amount of agriculture and agribusiness that we have in the Tri-Cities area are the result of the irrigation from those dams. So when I go to these rallies and when I go to interview people that want to remove the 4 lower Snake River dams, it feels kind of weird to me because my community in the Tri-Cities has benefited from those dams. And then to talk about removing dams seems a little odd. But I'm willing to trust the science, willing to trust the scientists, the fish biologists, on what they think from their studies and analyses on what will recover our steelhead, and go with that and discard any biases that I may have. For the past 3 months, I've been trying to get a leadership interview with NoAA or NOAA. Unfortunately, NOAA leadership declined. And I know they're pretty busy with their 5-year endangered listing reviews of Pacific Northwest salmon and steelhead. Last year, Washington State Governor Jay Inslee and Washington Senator Patty Murray had commissioned an independent study, a consultant study, on the pros and cons of the 4 lower Snake River dams removal. The independent consultant study published their findings this past summer, and they referenced NoAA Fisheries' own scientists and found that removing the 4 lower Snake River dams has the highest likelihood of removing salmon and steelhead from ESA listing compared to other alternatives. Also, the NoAA Media Department sent me a draft report that shows that the biggest factor of steelhead recovery in the Snake River Basin is the hydro system, or dams. And recently, NoAA has completed their 5-year reviews for salmon and steelhead species in the interior Columbia Basin and found that their endangered status, or ESA listing, should remain in effect. And the published recovery strategy recommends further improving passage through the hydropower dams versus removal of the 4 lower Snake River dams. So I was quite surprised to see this report, and I reached out to the NoAA Media Department for further clarification. And as of September 2022, almost 3 months later on the initial request to interview NoAA leadership, I don't have an answer from NoAA or an opportunity to interview their leadership on the official position of the 4 lower Snake River dams removal and their recommended strategy to get the Snake River Basin steelhead off the endangered species listing.
So it's September 23rd. I'm on my way to visit Idaho Fish and Game, but along the way, I got an email response from NoAA Fisheries, their media department.
They essentially told me that the official position of NoAA is that the 4 lower Snake River dams do not need to come out for the Snake River Basin steelhead and salmon to come off the endangered species listing. Instead, improved fish passage through dams, habitat work, controlling predation, and modifying hatcheries is all that's required. This is literally a game changer because these fish have been on the endangered species listing for 30 years, since the mid-1990s. So to have a plan where they will come off the endangered list without breaching the 4 lower Snake River dams, that's a big deal. That's a game changer. NOAA further commented that the only time that the dams need to be removed is if this region wanted healthy and harvestable fish stocks. So basically able to harvest wild salmon and steelhead. But even if it's just improved fish hydropassage, getting salmon and steelhead off the endangered listing, that is a major win. So I sent some emails back requesting from NOAA to interview one of the authors of the Snake River Basin Steelhead Recovery Plan to get more information on what type of improved fish passage through these dams will get the Snake River Basin steelhead off the endangered species listing.
Once an animal is listed under the Endangered Species Act, the agency that's responsible for its management at that point, the federal agency, is required by law to conduct a status review every 5 years. So when the most recent 5-year status review came out, it was a compendium of information that was collected, really data collected by the states and the local Indian tribes on what's happening with steelhead on the ground. And the finding from the most recent status review was that steelhead still need the protection of the Endangered Species Act. They have not recovered to sufficient levels that delisting is warranted. So the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, we submit a lot of data to the NOAA 5-year status review, but ultimately under the Endangered Species Act, it's NOAA's responsibility. It's basically their call on the status, and so we weren't directly consulted on the final assessment or the actions that needed to be involved that NOAA called out in their 5-year status review in terms of things that needed to be done to help steelhead. So in NOAA's 5-year review and the comment where they suggested that improve fish survival through the hydro system, one of the ways that has been proposed to do that is an increase in spilling water over the dams. So as you spill more water, it does 2 things. It moves fish faster because there's less delay of them milling around in the forebay above the dam, and it gives the fish less exposure to turbines. Fish going through turbines is not a good thing. It's not a good thing for survival. So those 2 things coupled together will improve juvenile survival as these fish move to the ocean. And what we saw in 2021, which was a fairly low water year, we actually saw higher speed of the fish traversing the river than you would have expected given the amount of water in the river, because we were spilling more than we have in the past. So the climate impacts are really not so much on fish going to the ocean, the little fish going to the ocean, because they're migrating in May and June when it's fairly cool. It's when you start getting into the July, August time frame, that's when the Columbia and Snake Rivers get really warm and you can have some serious thermal issues, hot water issues associated with adults migrating back upstream. Fish that are migrating upstream in the Columbia in July and August are exposed to some, in some years, can be exposed to some high water temperatures. What's being done right now to try to mitigate those high water temperatures, we release water from Dworshak Reservoir, which is cold. It flows down through Lower Granite Pool and cools the Snake River down below Lower Granite for a ways. There's also a concerted effort in the Columbia to reconnect some of the cold water areas in the estuary and some of the rivers that flow into the middle Columbia. And those areas, as that cold water meets the Columbia, provides fish a little bit of thermal refuge as they're migrating upstream. It's definitely a challenge, and it is something that we have seen and have documented reduced adult survival as those fish move upstream. With the information we have, it looks like additional spill should sufficiently increase steelhead and salmon numbers, potentially get them off the endangered species list. Right now we're dealing with models. The models suggest it's possible. We need to see it work in real life. At Idaho Fish and Game, we've been managing steelhead for almost 100 years, and I think the piece that sticks with me is that these animals are incredibly resilient, and you have to be a little bit of an optimist to be a fish manager. We are working with partners in the Columbia Basin to improve migration conditions. We're working with willing landowners all over Idaho to improve habitat for steelhead. So I maintain a lot of optimism that our runs are going to be okay. We're seeing some increases in hatchery returns this year. We've got over 30,000 hatchery fish coming back to the Clearwater. That provides a tremendous fishery. We've got some challenges with one ocean steelhead returning to the salmon and snake, and these fisheries are going to cycle, but overall, I'm confident that we're going to have steelhead for a long time.
It's how important this issue is to each and every one of you. Governor Brown is so proud of this event because it's a grassroots event spurred by individuals, communities, the list of NGOs you just heard, and our tribal friends. And combined with the electeds like Governor Brown's support for breaching the 4 lower Snake River dams to save the salmon and to provide a food source for the orca, we're going to succeed. I am fully confident we're going to succeed. I wouldn't be here today if I didn't think we're going to succeed. But it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. I want to address 3 key points that are very, very dear to the governor. And they're all based on the premise that time is of the essence. Number 1, the salmon are in crisis. I want to address that. And the science is clear on that. Number 2, we need to address these cultural, social, and environmental injustices. Time is of the essence on that. And third, we need to develop a lasting, enduring, comprehensive fix to this problem. And time is of the essence on that, because that's going to take politicians to stand up, take a position, and vote in favor of breaching those 4 Snake River dams. So first and foremost, the salmon are in crisis. And as I mentioned, the science is clear on this. Science has been clear for decades that the numbers are declining. There's a lot of you out there who know this, but I need to say it for some who are new to this subject. Prior to the Europeans coming in the mid-1800s, the average salmon runs coming up the Columbia past Astoria were between 9 and 17 million fish a year. 9 to 17 million, based on different ocean conditions or whatever, but it was enormous. We are now down to somewhere between 500,000 and 700,000 native salmon coming up the river past Astoria. 5% of the original runs. It's just a travesty. There are a lot of fish coming up the river that are hatchery fish, and that's great. That's a great bridge to help us get to a better future for the native wild fish. But the wild fish are down to about 5% of their run. And for those of you who may not know, those fish coming up the river are not all the same fish. They have different DNA. They are different stock. Some spawn and rear down in the estuary streams and tributaries, some in the mid-Columbia area, some in the upper Columbia Snake and upper Snake. They are individual stocks. They're not interchangeable. You can't take a Snake River fish and say, sorry, too many dams, you can't get to your spawning ground, just use the estuary streams. It's in their DNA, millions of years of DNA, where they need to go to the Salmon River. So we need to open up that river for them. And time is of the essence because those stocks, in particular, the Snake River stocks, are on the brink of what the scientists are telling us is an extinction spiral. Without action, real action soon, we may lose those stocks. So time is of the essence on that front. You'll hear a lot of folks who support keeping the dams that they'll say the science is unsettled, or we need more studies. We need more studies to see if that's true. No, the science is settled. That's delay tactic. The tribal governments, not only with history of fishing in this area, but they're fish biologists who also have masters and PhDs are some of the brightest people out there. They know these fish and they know the science and they know what's real. So we need to stop the debate on doing more studies. These fish are dying, the numbers continue to dwindle, it's time to move forward. Second point on the cultural, social, and environmental injustices, Governor Brown has been very clear that she recognizes the harms that have been done, the injustices that have been done, the lies and the broken promises. That has to change. Time is of the essence to address these injustices. As I mentioned earlier, we can't just say we're sorry for the past. We need to change how we operate, change our systems, change our politics to have a better future. And then thirdly, time is of the essence on a fix for the salmon and for the Snake River. We are in conversations with the Biden administration and the federal agencies. We're trying to build a comprehensive solution to this, including input from all the basin tribes and other states and other key stakeholders to fix what's going on. It's a comprehensive solution that will not only address and seek legislation to appropriate monies and authorize the breaching of those dams, but will deal with the blocked areas in the basin. Some of the Native American tribes who have long suffered over no fish at all because they're in a blocked area. It'll address the backlog of hatchery repairs and maintenance. There's over $1 billion of backlog on hatcheries, many of which are managed by individual states like Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, but many that are managed by Native American tribes. And finally, we need to look at the services provided by those dams. You'll hear people say how critical they are to the future of Northwest power grid. They're not. Again, relying on good sound science and engineering, we're able to demonstrate that although hydropower is quote unquote clean in terms of climate change, and it needs to be an important component of our climate change strategy. Of the 14 federal dams in the system, those 4 on the Snake River only provide a fraction of the needed power. And when you look at climate change, it's not just increased temperature in the atmosphere. That increased temperature in the atmosphere completely alters the water cycle. So we're going to see longer droughts, we're going to see less snow, and we're going to see warmer rains in the summer. The entire water cycle is going to become more unstable and unreliable. Why would you have 70% of your electric power source based on water turbines when water is going to be the #1 uncertainty in the future? We need to expand our portfolio of clean energies, including wind, solar, offshore wind, green hydrogen. But most importantly, I want to raise this today because this is new. The state of California is investing in mega banks of batteries. I'm talking 4,000 megawatts already online, and they're looking at upping that to over 9,000 megawatts by next year. To put that in perspective, the lower Snake River dams provide 3,000. They're getting battery storage already at 4,000. Battery storage is critical because, as you can imagine, wind and the sun don't always show up. You got cloudy days, you got nights. You got windy days, you got calm days. But if you got batteries to store that energy and store it for upwards of a day, you can address the pulse cycle of demand in the system. This is a new technology. The Nez Perce tribe just put in a system on their reservation of battery storage to help them manage their electric system. It is here now. It's not a future hope of storage. That technology is here today and can help us solve this problem. So I urge all of you, and I'm so happy to see you're involved, you need to call your congressman, call your senators. So the fishery crisis, we need to fix this cultural and environmental injustice issue. That's a crisis. And we got some legislation that we need to pass and legislation we need to block. That is, time is of the essence. So Governor Brown thanks you all. She really appreciates this grassroots effort. She's 100% behind you, and she fully supports breaching the lower Snake River dams. Thank you.
So, to recap thus far, 3 governors, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, on the subject of removing the 4 lower Snake River dams. Idaho is a no. Their existing process will work. Oregon is a yes on breaching those dams. And Washington is move forward with a process to remove the dams to retain as a policy option in the future.
We are nothing without our salmon, without our people, without our language. And this is not only a fight for the salmon, but for us as people. President Biden, the Native American youth in our country need your help. When you were elected, we had hope that things in this country might change, that fish, animals, waters, and forests would be protected. Now we have something to ask you. Our salmon are disappearing too quickly, and we can't wait for many more years to help them. Our elders tell us about a time when there was more salmon than our people could even eat. Our salmon that swim from the Nakiamana, Snake River, Columbia River, into the Pacific Ocean are family to us, Waikunush Naimuma, our salmon relatives. They're our relatives. The rivers are too warm and polluted, and dams are blocking them from migrating. For our tribes, there is one way that you and your friends in Congress can help. Remove and lower the dams on the Snake River and let our river flow free.
I am a state senator and I represent my district, but part of my job also is to work for the entire state because I am the chairwoman of the Senate's Budget Committee. We call it the Ways and Means Committee. And that is the committee that's key to determining how the taxes paid by the people of Washington state are spent. And so we essentially write the state budget. And the importance of that committee can't be understated because that committee's desire to invest in fish and wildlife habitat restoration projects is essential if we're going to do anything in that realm. So one of the things that I look for in members of my committee and that I really value in members of the legislature and in local leadership are people, regardless of their political party, regardless of Democrat or Republican, Eastern Washington or Western Washington, but people that are able to bridge and help everyone else bridge cultural divides, and people who are able to actively bring others together around a central theme. So I think that it's really safe to say that Washingtonians in general really prioritize the environment that we have. We really care about our natural resources. We love our natural beauty. We value our farms, we value our forests, and everybody values the people who keep our farms and farming and our forests and forestry. We don't want elected leaders who stoke fear. We don't want people looking for power by creating fear among the people they represent. At the same time, we don't need elected leaders who are creating fear and who are creating the panic that's leading to stoking the fear on the other side. So on all accounts, we need leaders who can bring people together, speak the truth, be patient with one another, hear the different interests from around the state, whether or not they're representing those interests. We need people who can bring people together. Those dams brought economic prosperity like we've never seen before. They built our state's agricultural industry, especially in Eastern Washington. We export food to the rest of the world. Our wine industry rivals Napa Valley and is world class. The irrigation ditches, the irrigation systems throughout Eastern Washington were built by the federal government. The dams were built by the federal government. We will count and work in partnership with the federal government to bring those dams down if that's what we need to do for the next century of economic prosperity. We need to be following a science-based and economics-based approach to whether those dams should come out, whether they should all come out or which ones should come out. But let's follow the data, let's follow the science, and let's look at sound economic planning to make sure that if we make these decisions, we can first follow through with them and make sure that the decision is leading to economic prosperity for our next century. And before we breach any of the dams on the Snake River, We need a fully formed plan for how those dams would come out and what we would do as follow-up to that. We need to be able to keep promises that will be made, and we need people to have faith that their government will follow through for them. And part of that discussion is making sure that we have the infrastructure in place after the dams are removed, making sure we have substitute transportation infrastructure for instead of the barges, making sure that we have water for the farmers so that they know they have prosperity going forward for their kids and their grandchildren. And making sure we can restore the rivers to their natural state so that we have habitat for the fish to come back to. The Columbia River steelhead have been on the endangered species list for 30 years. We have the data that we need. We know what we need to do. We need people elected who share a sense of urgency and share a commitment to fixing this problem and bringing the steelhead back.
He's not ready. Woo. Oh yeah. Don't let him get near the raft. Walk out this way. That looks like a summer.
Follow your fish, babe. Follow your fish.
Not ready. How you feeling, Lauren? Walk out this way. He's almost ready. Not quite. Okay, gobble down. That's a wild steelhead for you. Doesn't come in like a salmon does.